Welcome to my 10-minute primer on national security review in Canada. In this podcast, I will define review and then examine how it operates at present in Canada, assessing along the way some of the challenges and shortcomings in this area. I'll then assess the implications of the proposed new National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, an entity that seems likely to be created by Bill C-22, as I record this in June 2016. In so doing, I draw on the work that Professor Kent Roach and I have been doing over the last several years, and I'll provide links to some of that at the end. So to start, what do we mean by review? In Canadian practice, review is the process by which independent bodies retrospectively evaluate the conduct of security and intelligence agencies. A reviewer does not have operational or command control responsibility for the agencies, nor is the reviewer part of the chain of command managing the conduct of those agencies. Instead, Canadian review bodies have focused on audits, in practice partial audits, of agency conduct to ensure compliance with law and administrative rules. That is, they focus on questions of propriety. Have the agencies complied with law and policy and operational standards? Now, some people call all of this oversight, drawing on an American term that has colloquial resonance now far outside of the United States. But oversight is used differently in Canada. In the Canadian lexicon, oversight does mean command, control, or coordination. It is usually the purview of the executive branch. Ministers, for instance, may need to sign off on certain conduct. Judges, too, perform a form of oversight where the law requires the agency to acquire a warrant in advance of at least some intrusive investigations or operations. But in this primer, I shall hew to Canadian practice and use the term review to discuss the back-end accountability function. So why do we need review? Let me propose 5 reasons. First, security and intelligence agencies exercise substantial power, including the power to restrict rights and liberties, and if used excessively, violate those rights and liberties. Second, historically, security and intelligence agencies in Canada and elsewhere have sometimes misused these powers. In fact, the entire architecture of the current Canadian security and intelligence community reflects a reaction to the abuses conducted by the RCMP security services in the 1970s. Third, security and intelligence agencies very often exercise their power in secret. And so those who have been investigated may be forever oblivious to this fact and in no position to complain about misconduct. 4. Security and intelligence agencies are publicly funded and despite the secrecy around their conduct should be accountable for their use of public resources. 5. Security and intelligence agencies are generally insulated from the outside scrutiny and exposure that sometimes is essential to improve efficiency and effectiveness. And so the risk is that agencies may stray into patterns, policies, or groupthink, impairing their effectiveness. Outside overview, scrutiny, and review can check this propensity. So if we need review, what then are the ingredients of effective review? Let me propose several important elements. First, independence. The review system must be independent of the government and the agencies that they review. The review bodies are not, in other words, both the watcher and the watched. Second, mandate. Review bodies must be able to audit the propriety of security and intelligence actions, and so, for example, assess whether the agencies have conducted themselves in accordance with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, other law, ministerial directives, policy, international obligations, and other values and standards of propriety that are expected in Canadian society. But also, a well-developed review system should be able to scrutinize the efficacy or efficiency of the agencies. The public should be confident that tax dollars are being spent appropriately, that priorities match security realities, that agencies work hand in glove with one another as efficiently as we might suppose they should. Third, we have to be concerned with the question of transparency. A viable review system requires 2 different sorts of transparency. First, there has to be openness within the secrecy tent. The activities of the security and intelligence community should be completely transparent to the review body itself. And so that body must possess powers to compel full access to information. There should also be some large measure of transparency vis-a-vis the public. Review bodies must themselves ensure transparency in relation to an external audience. To this end, they have to do more than simply provide some sort of opaque guarantee or promise that the agency is acting in a proper manner. Rather, the review body's reports have to be sufficiently informative and sufficiently detailed to justify that conclusion, or to explain with sufficient detail where that standard of propriety has not been met. The question of transparency, of course, raises enormous conundrums. Agencies will be hypersensitive to the idea that reviewers are able to paw through their files and to see the full range of information in their possession. And so there have to be guarantees and safeguards in place that create trust between agency and reviewer as to how this information will be handled. And insofar as reporting to the public is concerned, obviously there will be constraints on how much of the findings and conclusions of the review body can be unearthed in public, for fear that too much exposure can undermine the security objectives of the agencies themselves. And so design becomes an essential question. So what are Canada's challenges in the area of review? Well, put simply, our challenges fall into three broad categories. First, a problem I'll call stovepiping, a related problem I'll call siloing, and then a whole-scale focus historically on propriety rather than efficacy. Turning first to the question of siloing and stovepiping, let me briefly explain the architecture of Canada's security and intelligence community. We have CSIS, charged with security intelligence. We have the Communications Security Establishment, charged principally with signals intelligence as well as cybersecurity in the Government of Canada. We have the RCMP with a federal policing mandate in the area of national security. We have the Canada Border Services Agency, which enforces any number of laws concerning Canada's borders. These are the agencies at the pointy end of the stick, that is, agencies with intrusive powers. Next, we have a great swath of other bodies that are part of the security and intelligence community. Depending on who you're talking to, there are 15 to 17 other government agencies. So parts of the Privy Council Office, the Canada Revenue Agency, the Canadian Air Transport Security Authority, Citizenship Canada, Global Affairs, Financial Transactions and Report Analysis Centre, Public Health Agency, Transport Canada, just to name the most obvious. Of these agencies, all are reviewed on certain specialized subject matters by specific reviewers. And so the Privacy Commissioner on privacy issues, the Auditor General on financial matters, but both the remit and capacity of these reviewers on security issues is modest, which means that we need specialized reviewers. Almost notoriously, we only have specialized reviewers for three agencies: the Security Intelligence Review Committee for CSIS, the Office of the CSE Commissioner for CSE, and the relatively new Civilian Review and Complaints Commission for the RCMP, which is just on the cusp of performing its first review in the national security area. When I say stovepiping, I mean this phenomenon of limiting review in the area of national security to a handful of agencies. Also, notoriously, these three specialized review bodies are limited in their capacity to collaborate jointly with one another in their reviews involving classified information. The result is that they operate in silos, even while, quite reasonably, the agencies they review now collaborate more readily, a trend that should accelerate given the threat environment. The other complaint concerning Canadian review is that it is, in essence, entirely confined to propriety review. That is, reviewing whether the agencies are complying with law and policy. There is no independent body that looks at efficacy issues. How well do the agencies work together? Do they have the right priorities? Have they allocated resources reasonably? The absence of any sort of system-wide efficacy review means that no one outside of the executive branch, and quite possibly very few people inside the executive branch, are tasked with keeping an eye on how well the security and intelligence system as a whole works. And what about Parliament? It has been notoriously ill-informed on security and intelligence matters, and with some exceptions has been an insignificant player in holding these bodies to account. The single most important reason for this is that parliamentarians have been denied access to classified information. So, what should be done? In my view, a reformed review system would correct these deficiencies. First, it would ensure that expert reviewers with full access to information have a system-wide remit and are not stovepiped or siloed. Second, it would ensure that someone in the review system has the mandate to consider efficacy issues. Third, it would invest parliamentarians with a more meaningful role in security and intelligence accountability questions. What is happening now? Well, Bill C-22 is a first step in resolving these concerns, but only a first step. I'll not seek to outline its precise content here, but rather note its key features. It will invest a special, statutorily created committee staffed by 7 MPs and 2 senators with a review function broad enough to include efficacy review, which is very welcome, and some propriety review. And that remit will be system-wide, not limited to some subset of the security and intelligence community. So in other words, it will not be siloed and stovepiped. But this committee will not be as robust a reviewer as are the expert review bodies like CERC, at least on paper. For one thing, the parliamentary committee's capacity to delve into the actual operational details that are the necessary focus of propriety review is subject to a veto by the executive. Second, the committee has a much more limited access to information than does CERC or the CSE commissioner, and possibly also the RCMP CRCC, although that body itself has a regrettably limited ability to see operational related information. Still, the Committee of Parliamentarians will be a welcome addition to the constellation of review bodies, assuming it is staffed with earnest members with access to an expert staff and adequate resources. Its existence will not, however, vitiate the need for an expanded expert review body or bodies with an equivalent all-of-government remit able to do serious propriety review because they will have access to all of the information. Bottom line, some reviewer in the system needs to have full access to information and a mandate broad enough to sweep in all of the security and intelligence community. Bill C-22 and the new Committee of Parliamentarians does not do that, and so there is work yet to be done. If you wish to read more on these topics, you'll find a full discussion paper on review and national security here, and I will also refer you to my regular national security law blog where I intend to write on this topic as the Bill C-22 process unfolds. Many thanks for your interest.